Iska was an ugly, miserable loser who was a powerful saint disciple wielding the astral swords and fights for a nation that has nearly killed its entire population. 1 year ago, he freed a witch that had been imprisoned by the Empire and was stripped of his title as a saint disciple before being locked away as punishment for his act of treason. Thanks to his skills, the gods of the world offer him a chance at freedom, but he has to defeat the powerful Ice Calamity Witch to keep it, so he requests for his astral swords and his old teammates Neen, Jin, and Nismus. The next day, they leave to protect the reactor, but suddenly jump from the tank because of a mage ambush. But then Iska sees a fireball heading for Jin's head and uses his sword to snuff it out. Jin then tells Nismus to head home if she can't handle real combat and proceeds to let off a shot weaker than your pull-out game. The mages respond by revealing their earth-bending comrades, and Jin still tries to cover up his epic fail by sounding cool. Iska, on the other hand, admits to wasting his arm strength on a heady gun session, so Neen takes over and uses power flares to smoke the mages. Jin immediately tries to redeem himself while Iska dodges the lead mage's attack and takes him out before his Ludenoth assistant also receives a permanent concussion thanks to her Sakura-level skill. Just as Jin tries to take all the credit, a colossal earth golem spawns, and Rin introduces herself with a promise to make their deaths painless. She then commands the golem to attack, but Iska uses a single slice to make it disabled before telling Jin and the girls to go help other soldiers at the front lines. Once they leave, Rin regenerates the golem's arm and attacks with earth spears, but Iska cuts them down with ease. He then asks about the Ice Witch, but she keeps attacking, so he evades again and catches her off guard to ask again. Rain tells him to make it quick, as she would rather get sent to the Lord than live as a snitch. Her statement distracts him, so she rips off part of her dress to blind him for an attack, but he still manhandles her like the pathetic weakling she is. Just then, he sees a snowy fog taking over and jumps back as the Ice Witch, Alice, finally reveals herself. To show off her powers, she takes the entire forest back to the Ice Age and thanks Ren for stalling Iska before destroying the reactor. Sensing Iska's aura, she takes a moment to remind him that she is the feared Ice Witch his empire has been too scared to fight, but he tells her to stop the yapping so they can fight. He then rushes in, and she conjures up an ice wall, but he easily scales over it, so she attacks with an infinite ice sword skill that rips through his defenses. He immediately counters with the same skill, which shocks Rin, and charges in for the final slice, but Alice activates a powerful shield that forces him back. After jumping off a tree to get closer and cutting through her last attack, she jumps back and asks why he won't give up. He also asks why she won't retreat, so she tries to tell him about her dream for world peace, but slips at the last moment. Thankfully, he catches her, and his Giga Chad face almost makes her forget that they are sworn enemies. After jumping off his arm, she summons an albatross to escape his Rizz and promises to defeat him next time before they both leave. Later that day, Ren finds her soaking up her milkers in the bath and offers to help her finish up, but the memories of Iska keep getting her inner walls wet. To distract herself, she suggests going to see a play in a city where combat between both sides is forbidden, and Ren reluctantly agrees. At the opera house several hours later, she starts bawling her eyes out watching the play and has already soaked up her napkin, so a gentleman offers his own to help her out. Once the play ends, she tries to thank him, but then the lights come up, and she sees that it's Iska. Earlier on that day, Nismus went to his room to ask if he needed some sloppy topping to help him feel better for letting Alice get away, but he was much too sad for that.
What?
She then gave it some thought and said a change of scenery would be nice before taking him to the dumpster she called a room. He had barely taken a step in when he saw her kitty covers. After clearing them out, she brought out a ticket to the play in the opera and spent a few minutes convincing him to go see it before he agreed. In a dream shortly after that, he remembered the night Master Crosswell handed over his swords and said they had the power to change everything. He then woke up in the van with Neen and told her about it while she drove to the neutral city for the play. A little while later, he was in his seat, trying to enjoy the play when Alice started bawling her eyes out until he offered his napkin. After getting up and seeing him, she gets pissed and immediately challenges him to a duel, but Ren reminds her that fighting is forbidden in the city. She then accuses him of silently stalking her for a sneak attack, but he says she would have noticed his presence if she wasn't such a pathetic crybaby. Once again, Rin has to stop her from turning the arena into a popsicle, so she greets him goodbye and they leave. After a few minutes of looking over her shoulder to make sure he is not following them, they go into a restaurant to eat, but all the tables are booked out, so the waiter gives them a spot that has been booked by someone else. The next moment, she leads Iska inside to sit at his table, and Alice starts choking on her water while Rin gets ready to fight him. He quickly explains that he had already made a reservation before the play, so Alice tells Rin to cool off since they can't pick another table. Rin is still against eating at the same table with an enemy, so Alice says running off just because he showed up would be a bad look. While he looks through the menu to pick a dish, she gets lost in his chiseled jawline until he finishes and proceeds to order the exact same thing she does. After getting served, they spend the following minutes talking about their love for pasta and all the different ways they love to make it. Tired of being the third wheel, Rin interrupts so Alice can finish eating and waits until they get back to the palace before telling her to keep everything that happened to herself. Alice then tries to keep his napkin for a goon session, but Rain tells her not to get attached as he might end up being her strongest enemy. After saying she will never get attached to him and arguing with Rin about it, she still keeps the napkin beside her and struggles to fall asleep. Meanwhile, Iska drifts off into a dream about a time in the past when a train he was on got attacked by lizards. He almost got clapped, but a girl who looked a lot like Alice showed up to help him. The next morning, he joins the team for a workout, but Miss tiny legs quickly run out of juice, so she tries to take a break. Just then, a four-eyed chick named Rizz shows up to tell them that she will be overseeing the next mission before asking Iska if he is feeling better. She then gives him a ticket for an art exhibition and tells him to go check it out instead of sitting through another depressingly boring play. Around the same time, Alice goes to see her mum, Milaver, who then asks about Iska and tells her to be careful because he might be the Empire's strongest soldier. She then shows Alice a crystal formation holding the founder of the sovereignty, whose twin sister was the famous Grand Witch the Empire defeated. She further explains that the Empire still doesn't know about the founder and says that the crystal formation keeping her sealed started cracking after Alice's fight with Iska. All Alice can think of that could cause it is the astral art Iska used during the fight, so Milaver tells her to stay away from any battle until they figure out who Iska really is. After leaving, she tells Rin about her trouble sleeping and decides to go out somewhere else for a change of scenery. Rin immediately says going back to the neutral city will be a bad idea, but Alice promises to visit a new attraction to avoid running into Iska. Minutes later, they run into each other in the neutral city, and she sees that they are both heading to the same exhibition before asking why an Imperial soldier spends more time sightseeing than actually being a soldier. After saying that she is the weirdo for coming to see the works of an artist from the Imperial City, he suggests walking together, but she refuses and ends up in a dark alley filled with rats. Hours later, she makes it back to the fountain, and he shows up to offer his help again, so she reminds him that they are sworn enemies destined to fight in a war. He still insists on seeing it with her, and she easily folds like your ex did when she first saw her bestie's magic stick. Moments later, they make it to the exhibition and keep talking about their perspectives on the artist's style until she stops herself from becoming obsessed with him. Afterwards, she gets him a drink as payment for the help and tries to talk about something else, but he falls asleep right on her golden globes. Later that night, Nismis starts to complain about the amount of files she has to look through right before Iska shows up with drinks to ease the workload. Just then, Rizz calls in to check on Nismis and tells Iska to head to the conference room for a meeting with the Senate. Once he gets there, they commend him on stopping Alice in the forest, but he rejects their praises because he let her perfect milkers deceive him into letting her go.
I gotta tell you, it was perfect.
They then offer to reinstate his position as a saint disciple and grant him access to the Emperor for his goal of world peace on the condition that he must defeat Alice the next time they get a chance to fight. Afterwards, he gets back to his room and spends a few minutes reminiscing on the time they spent together before calling Nismis to skip out on the training scheduled for tomorrow. Naturally, she gets curious to know why, and he only tells her that he plans on heading over to the neutral city again, so she decides to come with him to make sure he isn't up to something stupid. At the same time, Alice is back in the palace, thinking about how she foolishly sent Iska back despite knowing how dangerous he is. Just then, Rin comes in with all the data on Iska and explains his former rank as the youngest ever saint disciple, shocking Alice, who then asks why they didn't know about him before. After she explains his imprisonment and hands over the printout, Alice gets confused again and asks why he attacked her if he risked his entire life just to save one mage. After Rin promises to figure out who the mage he freed is and leaves, Alice grabs his napkin, and Milaver suddenly shows up to remind her that the Empire once hunted mages like rats. She then finds a piece of art she got from the exhibition and warns her against patronizing the enemy before wishing her a good night and heading off. With her senses finally intact, Alice calls Rin back inside and asks to be escorted back to the neutral city first thing tomorrow, but Rin reminds her that they could run into her Prince Charming. Alice then says she is actually planning on it so she can finally see if he just likes her melons or has been playing her ever since they first met. On the way to the neutral city the next day, Mismus asks Iska about his plans, but he says it's all just a gut feeling that he is following in hopes of learning the truth. At that moment, Alice's albatross flies over them, so he tells Mismus to speed up, and they both eventually make it to the fountain, where Alice and Rin are already waiting. Before they can both get a word in, Mismus asks who the Monty Milker's chick is, so Alice introduces herself as the Ice Witch. The midget weakling almost craps her pants upon hearing that, so Alice suggests having their conversation outside the city to avoid causing a scene. Once they get far enough, she asks Iska why he saved the mage back then, and he says it is because she was still young at the time and didn't deserve to be imprisoned just for being born with powers. She then asks why he chose to attack her if he doesn't fully support the Empire's ideologies, so he tells her about his goal to negotiate for peace between both sides. He goes on to explain how he planned on kidnapping her with the hopes that it would force the sovereignty into listening to a negotiation. After listening to his plan, she tells him that it would have been an epic failure because her mum and the entire sovereignty wouldn't even bat an eye due to the immense hatred they have for the Empire. She also admits to being shocked by his goals because Imperial soldiers usually act like prehistoric cave people. To aid his cause, she tells him to serve under her command, and Rin immediately says it is the worst idea she has ever come up with, but she insists on it and promises to offer him immunity. Just then, an earthquake strikes, followed by a dark cloud of mist, before the sky shatters, revealing Nebulis, who has just escaped her seal. Before they can even understand what the hell is happening, she lets off a fiery blast that sends tremors all the way back to the sovereignty. Milivere immediately runs to check on the seal and gets happy upon seeing that Nebulis is free again, as she can finally obliterate the Empire. Back outside, Iska hurries to check on Mismus before asking Alice and Rin if they had been plotting to murk them the entire time. Alice then says she only wanted to figure out why she feels so strongly about him and proceeds to call Nebulis a meddling uggo for interrupting their conversation. Her ability to make instant popsicles gives her enough confidence to confront Nebulis, who immediately responds with a flaming spear that incinerates everything in sight. Luckily for Alice, Ren steps in at the last moment and endures flames hotter than fire breathing. She passes out, and Alice starts to panic, so Iska tells her to use her abilities before asking Mismus to take Ren to a hospital. After they leave, he pulls out both swords, and Nebulis recognizes them as the reason she woke up, so she summons a flaming dragon, but he easily cuts it down while Alice finally makes herself useful. After Nebulis unleashes another series of blasts, Alice calls her a traitor for attacking the mages she dedicated her life to fighting for. Nebulis then says her only goal is to destroy the Empire and tries to give them one last warning, but they both tell her to shut her undead face hole and continue hibernating.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
As they charge in to stop her, she unfolds her wings and uses the first for another fiery attack that stops Iska. She also uses Alice's astral art to summon a crystal beast, but Alice freezes it, so Nebulis unleashes the dark mist with full force to blow them away. Despite receiving multiple cuts across his body, Iska keeps holding on to Alice and convinces her to trust him because they have to fight together to survive. She then uses one of her most powerful ice spears to break past Nebula's shield, but she counters with an even stronger blast of dark energy that knocks Alice out. Iska uses that opportunity to charge in and cut through her attacks before Alice gets back up to support him with stairs of ice. Nebulis still charges up for a deadly blast, but then they both combine their powers to stop it, and he jumps off the edge with great force to cut down her wings, causing her to fall back through one of her dark portals. Moments later, he meets up with Alice to reject her offer, so they agree to continue being enemies but decide to call a truce to regain their strength. Several nights later, Iska loses the last of his allowance to a slot machine, and Jin suggests giving up so they don't become homeless, but Mismus refuses and runs off to get more coins. 2 weeks before that, Rizz had told her to take them all out for a few days so they can experience the good things in life before going on a super important mission. Back at the casino, they all meet up to talk about it, and Mismus starts to get worried as their little vacation is already coming to an end. But Jin tells her to stop overthinking, as it can't be worse than all the other life-threatening battles they have fought together. She then shows them the last batch of coins for the trip, and explains her plan to win the jackpot so they can get the latest military tank and safely escape the battlefield if the mission becomes too dangerous. After commending her, they all start heading back to the slot machines right before Rin brings Alice in for a night of extreme financial stupidity. Alice then says she prefers the neutral city, but Rin asks if she just wants Iska to sleep on her milkers again. She immediately denies it and acts like she just wants to keep a close eye on him for safety reasons, so Rain tells her that she can eyeball his glizzy all she wants on the battlefield. Moments later, she leads Alice up to the slot machines, and they both fail to notice Iska, who is still failing miserably with Mismis. After getting seated, Alice immediately starts making plans for the fight with Iska, until Alice realizes that she is basically cooking up the perfect wedding and forces her to start the game. Despite all that, she keeps thinking about him and doesn't even realize that she just hit the jackpot until everyone gathers around her. Neen also sees it and gets closer to say that such a win would have helped with Misna's goal for a new tank. Knowing that she isn't a brokey like her, Alice hands over her coins and says she doesn't need them, so Neen thanks her and takes it over to show the guys. Mismis immediately regains her faith in good luck, and Neen describes Alice to Iska, but he refuses to believe that they have ended up in the same place again. Several minutes later, Alice and Rin come across a fortune-telling shrine, so she goes in to get a reading. The lady can already tell that she is looking for a special someone to spread her cheeks, but Alice denies it and says she just wants to know when next she will meet her Prince Charming. The lady then spreads out the deck and pulls out 2 cards before saying he is always going to be close by. Moments later, she meets Rin and says the lady is probably just running a scam, so they continue heading out right before Iska gets to the shrine. He also goes in for a reading and makes the same request, so she spreads out the deck and pulls out the exact same cards before telling him the same thing she told Alice. Back at the Empire, Rizz gets called in by the Senate for a meeting, where they tell her about a vortex they just picked up at the border and suggest taking the team there because Iska's abilities will make him perfect to stop any attack from the sovereignty. The next day, they all get back to base, so Rizz calls in to cancel their usual mission for the one at the border. She further explains how the first vortex, which was caused by an astral drift, created Nebulis, and the power mages now use before ordering them to protect the new one from any sovereignty attacks. Around the same time, Alice tries to enjoy an outdoor goon sesh with Iska's napkin, but Rin interrupts to tell her about the vortex. Alice then asks why she didn't receive a formal report from the royal family in charge of monitoring the border regions, and Rin tells her that they are most likely delaying the report to keep the vortex power for themselves. They both immediately take a short trip to the Zoe family and take a quick look around before Rin senses someone and stops a man named the Masked Lord. After he claims to have just been teasing them, Alice asks if his face is so hideous that he has to live behind a kid's mask for the rest of his life. Knowing that she only came for the vortex, he acts like they only just heard about it and says it's nothing to worry about, so Alice decides to go take a look by herself. At base camp the next day, Mismis meets up with Iska and the others to talk about her discussion with the higher-ups about what happened in the forest before she spots an old friend and calls her over. After an intense hug, Shannarat introduces herself before they all assemble for a mission briefing from a soldier called Nameless. They then begin searching for the vortex, but after hours of finding nothing, Mismis gets a call from Shannarat about 3 units that have gone missing. Mismis then suggests heading back, as there will probably be new orders following the loss of those 3 units, but Nameless tells them to continue the search regardless. Unsatisfied with his orders, Iska decides to go ask questions at Mission Command and almost gets kicked out, but Nameless recognizes him, as they were both Saint disciples before his imprisonment. He immediately reminds Iska that he is now a worthless criminal in the eyes of the Empire, so Mismis steps in as his captain to ask about the lost units. Later on, Iska gets back to tell Jin and Neen how Nameless still kicked them out, right before Mismis jiggles her assets in their face while talking about how insulted she felt. She then realizes and begs them to forget about it.
No.
Meanwhile, Alice makes it to a secret mage outpost and takes a look around to find the vortex, which then shoots out a large stream of astral energy. Just then, the Masked Lord shows up and still says they only just discovered the vortex before introducing another masked weirdo named Kissing. He tells her to go say hi, but she gets shy, so he tells Alice not to worry about the vortex because Kissing has enough power to keep it protected. Alice then asks if his family is trying to hoard all the power to lead an all-out war against the Empire, but he deflects to remind her that it has always been the dream of every mage alive to see the Empire burnt to the ground. Just then, Mismis and the guys stop the tank close to the outpost and begin picking up readings of an astral art. After getting a call from Mission Control confirming it, she tells them that everything important is being moved to a second base in case of an emergency. Jin then says they have to keep looking for the vortex, so she takes a look around before her faulty eyes finally see the very obvious stream of astral energy. Neen gets excited as they could get recognition from the higher-ups for being the first to find it. But then another unit pulls up. Seeing Shannarat, Mismis excitedly runs over to share the good news, but then Shannarat says she already knew because her team is actually a covert unit of mages sent by the sovereignty to capture soldiers of the Empire. As she grabs Mismis, the boys try to help, but she tells them to stand back before she and the others in her unit show their insignias. Misma still thinks she is in a Disney movie and reminds Shanarot of the power of friendship, so she grabs her neck and unleashes a different kind of power that leaves little Miss Nuts for Brains screaming in pain. Just then, her teammates get cut down, and Nameless reveals himself with a warning to make her endure the same fate. Using his last strength, her teammate lights Nameless up so she can escape with Mismas. Nameless then tries to throw his knife, but Iska destroys it, and Jin shoots a tracking device onto the back of the truck. They then ask Nameless if he was really going to attack her with Mismas still in wrongay of his attack, but he ignores the question and says they will bomb the entire outpost along with Mismas once he gets back to base. Moments later, Alice keeps trying to figure out the Masked Lord's plan, but then a mage informs them of Shanarot's return, so they go to see her, and Alice immediately recognizes Mismas. She also recognizes Alice, but Rain knocks her out before she can blab, and Alice comes up with a plan to fight Iska at the base camp. As she starts heading for the Empire base camp, Rain tries to change her mind, but she says it might be her best shot at fighting Iska again. Moments later, he finds the secret outpost with help from Neen and Jin, and tries to make up a plan before Nameless can start the missile launch protocol. Just then, a missile lands just a few yards away from the outpost, and Neen says they have less than an hour before Nameless, and the higher-ups get an accurate location for the main attack. Neen then drives into the outpost and distracts the mage soldiers while Iska sneaks off to save Mismas from Shanarot. She immediately attacks with her lightning, but he easily deflects it, so Kissing offers to help out. Using her astral art, she deletes the second missile, and Shanarot starts glazing harder than your girl when she sees white hair and blue eyes. While Iska gets ready to fight her, Rin finishes searching the first base and tells Alice that it has been cleared out before sensing someone and taking a nasty cut from Nameless in her attempt to protect Alice. By then, Kissing has already started her attack, but Iska keeps managing to block them all, so she reconstructs the missile and detonates it right above his head. Back at base camp, Alice uses her abilities to force Nameless back and unleashes a flurry of ice swords to pierce through his suit. After evading them, he lunges the last two back at her, but Ren stops it, so he asks if she really thought she could win with her wannabe Elsa abilities. Alice then apologizes for underestimating his abilities and decides to pay her respects by unleashing an extremely dangerous astral art that turns the entire base into an ice skating rink. Just as she realizes that he escaped, the missile detonates, but after the dust settles, Iska gets back up without a single scratch and asks Kissing how she learned such a dangerous skill. She responds by creating a dragon of thorns, so he quickly evades before sneaking in close for an attack that knocks her out. After Shanarot escapes, Mismas runs over to Iska, but he suddenly swerves at the last moment to dodge the Masked Lord's stab. The light graze leaves him too stunned to make a move, so the Masked Lord picks up Kissing and promises to see him again before kicking Mismas into the Vortex. He immediately jumps in to save her and manages to grab onto her before Alice also jumps in and complains about how she spent all day searching for him. She then offers to help him on the condition that they have to fight afterward. He obviously accepts her stupid blackmail, so she uses her abilities to create steps, but the vortex suddenly intensifies and separates them before imploding. Moments later, Alice finds herself on the other side of the plane, and Rin checks to see if she has any injuries, but the only thing hurting is her heart and lower lips as she deeply wanted to be with Iska again. Meanwhile, Neen and Jin eventually find him with Mismas and ask how he survived, but he keeps the details to himself and swears to repay Alice someday. Days later, Alice drifts off into a memory of holding Iska in the vortex until Rin shows up and startles her. She tries to deny thinking of him, but Rain tells her not to worry about it and suggests visiting the neutral city until they find him so she can finally have the fight she keeps asking for. Meanwhile, Mismas keeps apologizing to Jin for being weaker than Prime Sakura, while Iska and Neen tell her it's okay. Jin then explains how useless she is for getting herself captured and standing like a Walmart mannequin until the masked hero kicked her into the vortex. After apologizing to Iska for putting him at risk, she scratches her arm, which gets Neen worried, but she says it's probably just a bug bite. Just then, Rizz shows up to inform them of a top-secret mission to infiltrate the sovereignty and capture Milavere. After checking to make sure she isn't high on nose candy, they ask how exactly she plans on pulling it off, because the sovereignty uses mage insignias like a passport before letting anyone in. Rizz then tells them not to worry, as a plan has already been made to solve that, but she refuses to explain it and says they will find out before the mission. Days later, Rin and Alice end up waiting for Iska at the fountain again. Alice starts getting fed up with not being able to find him, so Rin says he probably became deep-fried wings after the vortex. Alice immediately says there is no way he can get killed so easily and decides to split up so she can search for him without Rin's bad vibes. Meanwhile, Iska and the team continue discussing what Rizz's infiltration plan might be. Just then, they notice Mismus still messing with her arm, so Jin asks if she got an infection from her 50 Shades bondage obsession, and she gets embarrassed. Iska gets tired of seeing her be so helpless and tells Neen to take a look, so they get Mismus to take her jacket off and find a mage insignia on her arm. Mismus Trauma immediately advances to the denial stage as she asks if they have ever seen such a bug bite before, so Iska grabs her and tells her to stop acting like a crackhead before asking if she knows where it came from. Jin then reminds them of the Vortex explosion and says the astral spirit most likely possessed her, causing her to advance to a full mental breakdown as she realizes that her life has become a horror movie. As Jin and Neen start discussing what life in prison might look like for her, Iska gets close to promise that they will support her if she decides to turn herself in. He then swears to keep the insignia secret from everyone as she decides to hide it and continue being their captain. Iska and Neen also agree, which causes her to get teary and ask if they are really willing to risk their freedom to protect her. While she gets her tears cleaned up and thanks them, Alice gets back home frustrated, and Ryan suggests giving up on the search, but she starts finding different spots in the neutral city that they haven't even checked. Hours later, Neen and Jin go to Iska's room to discuss ways to hide the insignia while going about their regular activities, but after coming up with a bunch of ideas, they realize that it will be a lot more difficult and extremely dangerous, as the Empire will most likely suspect her of being a spy and execute her. While trying to find a solution, Iska sees a used ticket from the art exhibition and decides to take Mismus to the neutral city the next day. After seeing how peaceful the locals are, he reminds her that the entire world was once united until the Empire discovered astral energy and became scared of the power it gave to those who became mages. He then promises to fight so she won't have to worry about staying hidden anymore. After cleaning off her tears, she decides to go get some drinks for the both of them. Around the same time, Alice makes it to the city to resume her search. Moments later, Iska starts thinking about Riz's suicide mission to capture Miliver and tries to think of a way to actually pull it off without realizing that Alice is standing right in front of him. When she gets tired of the sun's heat and asks if they can share a seat, he calls out to her, so she takes a closer look and gets surprised to see him. She then explains all the effort she has put into tracking him down, and he asks if she still wants to take a seat, but she refuses and says Rin will complain as they are still sworn enemies. He offers to stand instead, but she also refuses to accept his kindness, so they both end up sitting together, and she asks what finally brought him to the city. He simply says something happened at the Empire, so she asks for details, but he says it's a secret, so she tries to make him spill by flashing her golden globes in his face. Thankfully, Rin shows up before she can enchant him, and she immediately blames him for making her act like your girl when her guy bestie shows up. Iska tries to defend himself, but Rin says she doesn't care and hands Alice a drink before giving him one and making it seem like she is being merciful because he is probably broke.
Yes, I do.
After watching Alice take hers, he opens up the can and notices a weird fragrance, but still drinks it like an idiot. Just then, he stumbles back into the seat and falls unconscious, and Rin apologizes to Alice before saying that she spiked it and thought he would have been smart enough to notice. She further explains that it was all just to make him stop talking so freely with her and proceeds to pick him up like a bag of chips just as Mismus gets back. Alice tells her not to make a scene, but she starts demanding to know why they are going against the rules to kidnap him in a neutral city. Alice refuses to explain herself, and Mismus gets pissed, causing a stream of astral energy to shoot out of her arm. After Alice manages to freeze her foot in place, they both leave with him, and Rizz, who hears the news, immediately pays a visit to the Emperor to tell him about it. Several minutes later, Ren starts driving towards the capital city, but Alice tells her to find somewhere else because Iska will most likely be executed once they get past the gates, despite knowing that Alice just wants to ride his glizzy like a seasoned cowgirl. She decides to change directions for a city they can get into without drawing attention. Moments later, Rizz starts a meeting with the Senate to discuss the Emperor's decision to put the infiltration on hold. She then tells them that witnesses saw Ren driving to a sovereignty city called the Prison Sector, where a demon who once fought against Nebulis is being kept. After she suggests freeing him to gain an upper hand in the war, they give her approval to create a new plan. A few minutes later, Jin and the girls get to the team office to await orders, and once Rizz finally shows up, Mismus asks if they can go save Iska. Rizz then says that is the only thing on her mind before opening a box and showing them capsules filled with astral energy. They get confused, so she demonstrates by using it to give Nain an insignia, and says it will be the perfect way to infiltrate the sovereignty to save Iska. She then tosses one to Jin, and he immediately walks over to Mismus before pretending like he imprinted it on the arm where her real insignia appeared. After Neen helps Jin apply his insignia, Rizz explains how they are to sneak into the prison sector and find Iska, while a bunch of undercover units will cause a diversion so they can get out and aid in the ultimate mission to capture Miliver. At the time, Rin has just gotten into the prison sector, so Alice tells her to head straight for their hotel and begins messing with Iska, who is still fast asleep. When she eventually stops herself from acting dumb, Rin slams on the brakes to avoid a cat, and it causes Iska to fall on Alice's mommy milkers. After she shoves him away, he regains consciousness, and Alice starts arguing with Rin over the dosage she spiked his drink with while he recalls what happened. Alice then tries to gaslight him for drinking something an enemy offered, but he simply expresses his disappointment and says he expected more from the feared Ice Witch. While she and Ryan start an argument over who is to blame, Jin and the girls had just made it past the prison sector's checkpoint thanks to the fake insignias, so he drives into the city while Rizz keeps a close eye on their progress. Moments later, Rin gets to the hotel and opens the door for Iska just to warn him against trying anything funny, as it could lead to him becoming a human kebab. Once they get to the room, Alice tries to relax, so Rin offers to escort Iska down to a special room she has prepared just for him, but she refuses, saying Rin probably just wants to torture him. Rin then reminds her that he is the enemy and will most likely try to spread her cheeks in the night. But Iska swears he has never even thought about her milky cakes. Rin gives up and promises to watch him instead, so Alice accepts and leaves to go relax in her presidential suite. Meanwhile, Rizz calls Mismus to ask about their little road trip, and Jin quickly describes how the entire sector is filled with prisons. Rizz almost spills the beans on the imprisoned demon, but she stops herself and gives them directions until they get to the secret location she has been watching from. Before they can understand how she even got there in the first place, she straight up caps about knowing where exactly Iska is being kept. Back in the hotel room, Ryan tells Iska that the plan to keep him was Alice's idea and says she has a better one before grabbing a knife and giving herself a cut. She then explains her plan to make it look like he gave her no choice but to end him in self-defense and attacks while he dodges and tries to talk some sense into her dark skull. On the other hand, Princess Dum Dum starts thinking of having Iska for dinner but stops herself before heading out to ask Rin for dinner and finding her struggling to stab him. Iska sees her and tells Rin, but she refuses to believe until Alice grabs her by the shoulder and asks if this is what she meant by babysitting Iska. At the time, Jin and the girls had just made it into the prison facility, but then Mismus starts to wonder why Rizz didn't follow them, and that causes Jin to suspect that the higher-ups might not really care about Iska getting kidnapped. Back in the hotel, Alice comes up with a genius idea to strap herself to Iska and tells Ren to head out with the keys so he has no chance at escaping. Iska then asks how she plans to use the ladies' room or sleep throughout the whole night, and it takes her brain cells a few minutes to calibrate before she realizes just how stupid the plan actually is. After calling out to Rin at the top of her lungs, she goes to the bath to get cleaned up while Rin takes over and promises to keep him away from her perfect melons at all costs. He then asks what her plan for him is, and she says he will most likely be locked away for the rest of his miserable life, so he can really regret not accepting Alice's offer. Just then, Alice comes back in with her cakes out and turns them in his direction while acting like she suddenly got amnesia and totally forgot that he was there. He pays more attention to her large insignia, so she asks what he thinks of it and assures Rin that she doesn't really care and is just curious to hear his opinion. He then tells her about a certain captain he knows who is currently a mage and says he will always protect her because he doesn't judge people by the powers or nation they were born into. Alice then asks what he thinks of her as a person, and he says she is only a rival he has to defeat, causing her to drop the towel in shock as she never expected some soldier to not care about her royal status or perfect melons. Rin naturally tries to roast him for saying the princess is a mere rival, but Alice stops her and says she has always wanted to meet an alpha who doesn't treat her like some precious trophy. Iska then tells her to stop acting like a fatherless bop, as her melons have been dancing in his face the entire time, so she grabs her towel and tries to pull out his ding-a-ling. Back at the prison facility, Rizz has just made it to the special cell where the shredded demon named Salinger is being kept. His chiseled abs make her act like your mom did last night. But Salinger quickly gets bored of her glazing and asks how she even made it inside. After saying she had special arrangements put in place, she offers to help him escape in exchange for his support in the invasion the Empire has planned to capture Miliver. He gives the offer some thought and decides that it's time to get outside for a change, so she blasts open the cell. Back in the hotel room a few moments later, Alice joins Iska and asks if he is having trouble sleeping. He then says he is simply taking in the view, and she explains that a lot of the buildings are prison facilities used to keep dangerous criminals, a lot of whom don't even have astral spirits except for the demon Salinger. Upon hearing that, he asks why she calls him a demon like they would back in the Empire, so she admits to not really liking it, but says it's essential as he betrayed the sovereignty with his abilities. Just as she tells him to keep their conversation secret from Rin, she shows up and startles Alice before saying that security systems just picked up the presence of Imperial soldiers in the city. Before she can accuse Iska, he denies having anything to do with it, so she tells Alice not to worry because alarm systems have been triggered across all the prison facilities. Somewhere in the prison facility, Jin and the girls have just heard the alarms, and Mismis thinks they have been caught, but Jin tells her not to worry as they would have already been surrounded if that was the case. Just then, Neen hears soldiers approaching and tells them to be quiet until the guards leave. Mismis then tries to figure out what is happening, but then an explosion rocks the entire facility right before she gets a call from Rizz. She apologizes for getting Iska's location wrong and tells them to focus on escaping without getting captured, so Jin pulls out his blaster and watches the prison guards as they split up into groups to check for intruders. Back in the hotel room, Alice has just seen the explosion and Rain gets an update on the situation from the prison before telling her about Salinger's escape. Upon hearing that, Alice goes nuts and says they have to stop him because he will most likely be gunning for Miliver's astral spirit. She then tells Rin to go get the car ready and apologizes to Iska for not being able to explain everything in detail. She further asks if he will be willing to help her out but tells him not to worry and runs out before he can say anything. Before leaving, she brings out a new napkin and apologizes for getting the one he gave her dirty before leaving it and running off again, while he wonders why she is always so dramatic. By then, Jin and the girls have just made it to another corner to evade the guards, but he realizes that escaping will be impossible and tells Neen to wait until he distracts them before using her guns. She instead offers to be the bait instead of him, and they both try to choose who will be the best option until Mismis hands over Iska's swords to Neen and says she is finally ready to stop being a Sakura duplicate. She then runs out with her Insignia exposed to pose as an escaped prisoner and threatens to blast the guards if they don't stand down, but they refuse and promise to take her down no matter the cost. She quickly runs off, and they chase after her with continuous astral attacks until she reaches a corridor and gets cornered on both sides. As they aim the barrel at her head, Jin and Neen take the shot to knock them all out, and Mismis buries her face in Neen's melons to cry before getting back up to continue finding a way out. Meanwhile, Iska starts getting frustrated as he can only watch from the room, but then he hears his phone ringing and finds it on Alice's bed. After answering and hearing Mismis, he explains the current situation and gets shocked when she tells him that they are in the prison facility. Jin then asks if he can leave the hotel, but he says it will be impossible thanks to Rin's handcuffs before realizing that Alice didn't just leave him a new napkin. He quickly runs back out to the table and finds the key inside it, so he tells Jin to focus on getting out so they can meet up outside. Just then, Alice's car gets hit by a flurry of bullets, so she and Rain jump out before it explodes and try to wrap their heads around the amount of chaos unfolding across the sector. Pissed off by how easy it was for the Empire to cause so much destruction, she freezes the wall of fire building up, and Rin commands all the soldiers to pay their respects. Alice then takes command of their forces and sends Rin to stop Salinger at all costs. Iska finally gets to the facility and meets up with the others, but then he collects his swords from Mismis and tells them to wait for him behind the hotel before running inside. When Rin finds Salinger, he tries to work his Rizz on her, but she refuses to be deceived and swears to punish him for being a traitor to the sovereignty. He then explains how his self-proclaimed status as a king gives him the right to take as many astral spirits as he wants, and she responds, saying all he will be getting is prison breakfast before throwing her ninja stars. After he blocks it, she jumps to attack, but he pushes her back, so she summons the Earth Golem to knock him off his rocky throne. After he shatters the golem, she tries to attack with its crushed remains, but he also activates an Earth-based astral art and slams the rocks into her thick skull. Realizing that he must have stolen such a powerful astral art from someone in the royal family, she tries to attack again, but he uses an invisible blast to knock her down. She still tries to crawl over to him, so he decides to finish her off, but then Iska slices through the attack and takes his stance to defend her. Rin starts to seize why Alice is obsessed with him, but then he says he is only doing it in exchange for a free pass out of the city after the fight. Salinger then expresses his surprise at the fact that an Imperial soldier is fighting against him and unleashes another invisible blast that causes tremors strong enough to reach Alice. At the time, a butler finds Princess Sisel outside and tells her to go back inside as the alarm systems are still going off, but she gets curious and asks for an update on the situation. While he explains everything to her, Iska continues slicing through Salinger's attacks, so he stops blasting and asks Iska how he can even see the attacks coming. He then says that they are not completely invisible, causing Rin to realize that he has been watching the flames to know which direction the attacks are coming from. After commending him on not being the average worthless soldier, he tries to prepare a powerful attack, but Rin explains what it is, so he blasts her away and tells her to stop spoiling the fun. He then sneaks in another invisible blast, but Iska dodges it and closes the distance between them in an instant before trying to chop his head off. After forcing him back with a wind skill, he switches to Earth, but Iska easily uses it to get closer for another attempt. Salinger then chants a powerful spell, so Rin tells Iska to jump right before the ground under him becomes a huge pool of magma. Iska thanks her for the help, and she decides to keep her worthless pride to the side for once so they can actually have a shot at defeating Salinger. While Salinger starts another rant about how pointless their attacks will be against him, Alice gives orders to the soldiers but then suddenly hears Nameless' voice and blocks his attack with her ice art. He then tells her to give up and accept that her great nation will lose, but she asks why he is yapping a lot more than usual and challenges him to a fight, but he tells her to focus on saving her nation and vanishes. Just then, Salinger finishes his yapping and unleashes a powerful combination skill, so Iska tries to cut through it again, but he only exposes himself to an enormous blast that makes him crispier than your grandma's fried chicken. Rin then asks him if he only steals astral spirits to bully everyone, but then he explains his ultimate goal of transcending all creation by merging humans with astral spirits. Upon hearing that, Rin swears to take him down if it's the last thing she does, and he asks how she intends to do that if the overpowered simp couldn't escape a simple fire art. She then tells him not to underestimate Iska because he took down Nebulis, but Salinger refuses to believe that he could do something like that and decides to send her to the Shadow Realm. Just then, Iska cancels out his attack and tries to cut him down, but he starts running up the beams while asking how on earth he still has all his limbs intact. After stopping on a beam, Iska explains how he froze himself at the last moment, and Salinger asks if he has actually gone insane because of how deadly that is, but Iska responds, saying he is simply determined to win at all costs. Salinger then jumps to the highest point and decides to end it all with a skill he has been saving for special occasions. Rin immediately summons her golem to protect Iska, but that causes Salinger to focus on her instead. Just as he releases the bolts of lightning against her, Alice freezes it and runs over to help her. Iska then gets close again for an attack, and Salinger converts his astral energy to swords for a counter, but Iska shatters them with a single swing. So he acknowledges him as a powerful opponent and promises to return even stronger before falling back into the underground prison for a swift escape. An hour later, Rin gets patched up and tells Alice that all the other prisoners have been placed back in their cells, so Alice says they have to give Miliver a report and thinks back to the smile on Iska's face before he left. Meanwhile, Nameless has just gotten back to the Empire and turns out to actually just be Rizz, which explains why she didn't have enough balls to face Alice. Nameless then gives her an update on the mission to monitor Miliver's palace, and she starts heading in to have a meeting with the Senate. At the same time, Iska and the others have just made it out of the Sovereignty, so Neen checks on him, and he claims to be okay, but can't help but feel tired after everything that has happened. Miss notices and asks about it, but he tells her not to worry and asks about her insignia. She immediately freaks out and says she had completely forgotten about it before begging for his help in finding a solution. Hours later, Alice gets back to the main palace with Rin and commends her on managing to fight on her own, but she admits to being weaker than fully conscious Zenitsu and says it was all because of Iska's help. Alice then fantasizes about his overpowered Glizzy again, and Rin catches her in the act, but ultimately accepts that she might have been wrong about the kind of man he is. While Alice uses that opportunity to ask if she can freely call his name whenever she wants, Sisel eavesdrops on their conversation and realizes that Iska was the soldier who freed her on that night. She then begs the anime gods to help her see him again so she can offer her thanks in a way he won't forget.
What do you mean by that?
After getting changed, Rizz gains access to the Emperor's chambers and joins Nameless to pay her respects before explaining what happened with Salinger. The Emperor, who turns out to be a cat dude named Yoon, tells her to skip all the boring stuff and says he is only interested in the fact that Alice is clearly too obsessed with Iska to think straight. Meanwhile, Sisel finds herself in a dream where Milivere gets attacked and immediately tries to see her, but after finding her occupied with the politicians, she heads back to her room. Several minutes later, Schwartz shows up and says Milivere is asking for her, so she goes to the throne room, where Milivere instructs her to visit an independent city called Alamira to see if they plan on supporting the Empire, as they have still not pledged loyalty or neutrality. She then offers to have her guards join the trip, but Sisel tells her not to worry about that and leaves right before a servant comes in to inform Milivere of the return of her eldest daughter. Back at the Empire, Iska gets back from a physical examination and explains how it went to Neen before she tells him that they all have to be examined in a week to see if the temporary insignias have worn off. Just as he notices how the news is affecting Rizz, Rizz gets dragged in by a scientist chick named Michaela. Rizz asks if there is a problem, and her response puts them all on edge, but she explains that they have simply been working too much thanks to Rizz and orders them to take a 60-day leave to rest. After they both leave, Rizz gets excited as she will no longer have to go through the examination. But Jin reminds her that they still have to figure out a permanent solution. Iska then suggests leaving for a vacation so they can have time to try out a bunch of solutions, and Neen says a resort far from the Empire would be the best bet. At the time, Rin has just dropped a new batch of paperwork for Alice to complete, but she starts begging for a break as she has been writing all day. Rin then decides to stop all the work for some time and prepares a cup of tea while Alice starts daydreaming about Iska. After serving the tea, she tells Alice about her older sister's return from what appears to be a mildly successful campaign. Alice then decides to go see her and runs into Sisel, who immediately turns back to avoid having a pointless conversation. Rin points out the fact that Sisel has been acting strange in recent times, but Alice says it's most likely all the stress of the elections to decide which of them gets to take over from Milivere. While she continues telling Rin about how boring palace life is, Sisel gets into a car to leave for her trip to Alamira. Before leaving, Schwartz asks if she is really okay with taking no guards, so she shows him a conversation between the egghead politician from before and another noble to explain how everyone in the palace has a motive behind their actions. After they leave, the masked lord who has been watching goes over to his seat and properly greets a baddie with gravity-defying milkers named Elatir, the first princess and eldest daughter of Milivere. Once they finish with the formalities, she tells him that someone in power is secretly working with the Empire, and he gets curious to hear more. She then acts like an innocent victim and grabs her mega melons to melt his last remaining brain cells before deciding to tell him who it is. Meanwhile, Iska and the others have just made it to Alamira for their vacation, and Rizz immediately tells him to blow up a floaty, so he reminds her that they haven't even found a hotel. She then loses her mind while trying to pick one and runs along to try out everything she can. Afterward, she and Neen get changed and join the boys on a beach to ask for their opinions on the swimsuits they bought. Hours later, Jin ends up carrying Rizz because her liver is too small to handle a can of beer. But then Iska and Neen tell him to take her back to the hotel so they can go buy stuff for dinner. After he leaves, Neen asks Iska to wait so she can empty her bladder and runs off right before Sisel bumps into his back and falls. He tries to help her and immediately recognizes her from the night he let her go, but then Neen gets back, so he tries to explain and sees that she has already left. While they start heading to the supermarket, Sisel keeps running until she gets far enough, and Schwartz manages to catch up despite his cranky joints barely holding him together. She then excitedly tells him that she has found her knight in shining armor and promises to explain everything back at the hotel. Back in the palace, Alice tries to get some rest, but Rin reminds her of a meet and greet she has to attend first thing in the morning. Before she can start complaining, Milivere calls out to her, so they both rush over to meet her by the door, and she tells them both to follow her. After dark, Sisel takes Schwartz back to the spot where she bumped into Iska and uses her astral art to pull up what happened afterwards so she can track him down. While Milivere takes Alice and Rin to Sisel's room and says she needs their help to figure out why she has been acting weird recently, Sisel follows her astral art's projection of Iska's past until they reach his hotel. Just then, Milivere opens the door to her room, and they all go in to look through her stuff, but then Alice finds an old newspaper about Iska's arrest and gets shocked along with Rin. Meanwhile, she has just found Iska's room and goes in to ask a question, but he immediately tackles her and thinks she is an assassin. After using her powers to reveal herself, he recognizes her again, and she asks if he will follow her back to the sovereignty. She then properly reintroduces herself and says she is not used to being pinned down like a rag doll about to get ploughed, so he steps back and apologizes. Meanwhile, Alice is currently losing her mind as she now thinks Sisel saw her with Iska in the neutral city. But Rain tells her to relax because her ability to see the past can only be used for places she is close to. Alice then says she likely overheard their conversation the other night, and Rin agrees with her, as it is the only explanation they can think of. Back in Iska's room, Sisel gets seated on his bed and apologizes for casually entering before saying she never got the chance to thank him for saving her. After saying she initially thought the whole thing was a trap on that night, she brings out a priceless bracelet and offers it to him as an appreciation gift, but he refuses and acts like he doesn't need the money.
Stop the cap.
She goes on to say that everyone in both nations heard about what happened that night, so he asks if that is how she got his name, and she says yes before promising to find a way to return the favor. She then offers to return his status as a saint disciple and promises to give him safety on the condition that he follows her back to the sovereignty. But that reminds him of the time Alice made the exact same offer, so he asks who she is. After she claims to be a humble servant of the royal family, he asks why she wants him when there are countless subjects ready to stand by her side, but she strongly refuses the idea to choose anyone else and says she cannot trust them. Realizing that it is all too much for him to understand, she apologizes and promises to come see him again for a better conversation. She leaves but forgets the bracelet, so he picks it up and tries to figure out what to do, while Rin gets on her knees to suggest that Milavir send Alice down to Alamira so she can have a talk with Sisel and figure out what is going on with her. After she approves, Rin heads out to make arrangements while Alice gets determined to figure out how Sisel knows Iska. Meanwhile, she has just left the hotel and wonders why her helpless baddie act didn't work on Iska. Back at the Empire, the Senate holds a meeting to discuss intel they just received about Sisel's trip to Alamira and decides to capture her with a giant mage hunting mech suit they just finished building. The next morning, Mismus throws back an entire bottle and gets excited to have barbecue for breakfast, but then Jin tells her to stop yapping so they can actually make the breakfast. She then tries to help Min out, but they start arguing over what to make first and try to get Iska's opinion, but he can't even hear them over his own thoughts. Around the same time, Elatir goes to see the Masked Lord again and properly explains that the traitors are her own sisters. He immediately starts laughing and tells her to stop making such jokes, as it could terminate her entire family's claim to the throne, but she assures him that it is true and says she doesn't care about the election as long as the sovereignty is safe. Upon hearing this, he asks why she has not dealt with it on her own, and she tells him that her relationship with them will affect her ability to do what is right, which is why she wanted to tell him about it. He then tells her not to worry anymore and promises to see to it that her sisters are brought to justice. Minutes later, Alice, who is on a bus driving through the desert to reach Alamira, starts to regret her decision to go alone. The attendant then tries to explain the landmarks close to them, but the driver suddenly slams on the brakes and says he can see large footprints on the road. Alice immediately runs out and gets worried when she sees the footprints along with oil leaks heading towards the city. An hour later, Mismus starts asking Iska why they have to change hotels, and he claims to have found one that will be better for their budget when he is really just tired of royal baddies trying to make him their overpowered love toy. Just then, Neen notices Mismus' sticker coming off and helps her put it back in place, causing her to remember that they have to find a permanent solution for it. Jin then suggests visiting the general market to find the same sticker Shannarat used to hide her insignia, as it could probably have a material that the Empire still can't detect. Once they get to the new hotel, Iska tells him to get settled in and says he has to find a place to exchange currencies. After taking his bag, Jin watches as he looks around the hotel and walks over to the corner before seeing the same obsessed freak he has been trying to avoid. He reluctantly agrees to speak with her, so they find somewhere private, and he asks how she even found him despite all his efforts to hide. She then opens up her insignia and explains how her astral art helped her replay the time he made a reservation at the new hotel earlier that day. After he asks why she would trust him with such a valuable piece of information, she also admits to actually being one of the princesses, and he gets shocked. She asks if he doesn't believe her, but he only gets confused as it makes no sense for a princess to need his help. So she tells him that someone from the royal bloodline is planning to attack Milavir. She further explains how her ability helped her discover their plan to draw the sovereignty into an all-out war against the Empire, and says they intend to destroy the current royal family in the process. While she continues explaining how his help will be vital to save both nations from destruction, Alice finally gets to the city, and Schwartz finds her before asking if she has seen Sisel, as he has been searching for her all evening. Minutes later, Iska finishes hearing what Sisel has to say and brutally rejects her offer. She then reminds him of the war it could lead to, but he says he is fighting for a peaceful agreement between both nations and will stop at nothing to achieve it. Just then, the Masked Lord shows up and expresses his disappointment with Sisel before saying he already knows that Iska is an Imperial soldier. She tries to explain, but he refuses to listen and orders his soldiers to arrest her on suspicion of treason, so she runs off. Iska then stops them and asks the Masked Lord if he is not meant to be on the same side as her, but he says that it is pointless since she has now chosen to betray the sovereignty. Just as he tells Iska to step aside, the Empire's mage-hunting robot shows up to capture Sisel. Seeing the colossal droid towering over, the Masked Lord starts to wonder if Elatir's melons are really worth all this trouble, but still commands his soldiers to get Sisel. Iska tries to run after them, but the Masked Lord uses teleportation to distract him, and his soldiers almost turn him into a Thanksgiving turkey. He then tells Iska to give up because he doesn't even have his swords, which leaves him powerless to their attacks. But then Jin shows up and asks the Masked Lord if his teleportation is fast enough to dodge bazooka bullets. After taking a closer look, Mismus recognizes the Masked Lord, and he also commends her on surviving the Vortex before pointing out the extremely large metal machine, which then scans all of them for astral energy and picks up Mismus energy as well. The Masked Lord then instructs his soldiers to capture Sisel at all costs, so they try to attack the droid, but it tail slaps them into the Shadow Realm and catches up to Sisel before charging up its mouth blaster. The Masked Lord then tries to intervene, but Jin stops him. So he explains that he is actually aiming for Sisel and wants nothing to do with pathetic Empire scum like them. After Jin says he only wants revenge against him for kicking Mismus into the Vortex, he orders his soldiers to blast them with fireballs. Jin then reminds him that they are in a city where dangerous fighting is forbidden, but the Masked Lord says he will simply blame it on their corpses and instructs his soldiers to disrupt their field of vision with a fog. Just then, Iska slices through the droid's blast, and Neen tells him to buy her some time, so he starts fighting it off but gets pushed back by its tail. He still manages to protect Sisel, so she asks why he is helping her instead of being grateful that she didn't become royal roadkill. As he keeps fighting the droid back, Sisel starts to feel a special kind of moisture, and Neen finally finishes setting up an EMP blast that fries the droid's systems. Just then, Jin and Mismus get to a corner, but the Masked Lord follows to attack. So Jin tries to hold him off and ends up with a nasty cut across his arm. After he uses a smaller gun to shoot his chest, it unfortunately only hits a recording device he planned to use as evidence against Sisel. He quickly grabs the gun from Jin, and Mismus rushes to check on him. But then the distinguished Scarecrow starts pouring out barrels of petrol to turn them into a burnt offering. After dumping the last barrel and giving a speech, his mage tries to light them up, but his astral art gets drained away. Just then, the Masked Lord senses a weird power and sees that it's Mismus, so he tries to run his mouth and almost gets sniped by a headshot from Jin. With his mask destroyed, he decides to retreat so no one gets to see just how ugly he truly is. Meanwhile, Iska puts his guard back up as he senses that something is off, and they all watch as the droid gets back up and switches to a secondary power source. This time, its mouth blaster begins to blind them, and they realize that it is using astral energy. So Iska tells Neen to take cover before grabbing Sisel and ducking to evade its blast. It immediately starts powering up again, so Neen activates another EMP blast, but it counters. So Iska tells her to regroup with Jin and Mismus so he can focus on stopping it and not have to worry about her pathetic weakness. He then runs in and evades all of the droid's plasma beams before jumping off for an attack, but Mismus sees it powering up and uses her abilities to distract it with a sandstorm from the past. Iska then uses that opportunity to stab into the droid's core, causing it to shut down and collapse. Before they can celebrate the victory, the astral spirit trapped inside it gets free and captures Sisel before revealing its true form. While Iska charges in to save her, Jin and the girls feel the tremors of their fight, and so he tells them to focus on getting the people to safety while he watches Iska take the beating of a century. Just as the astral spirit starts to overpower him, Alice uses her abilities to force it back and offers to help out before creating ice tentacles to hold it down and giving Iska a bunch of icicle steps he then uses to get closer. The astral spirit manages to break free before he can strike and pushes them both back before powering up its core for a blast. Iska quickly reminds Alice of the skill she used to take down Nebulis, so she summons the ice flower right on time to block the spirit's sonic blast. After it starts up a spell and releases an attack that obliterates everything in sight, Alice tells him that they have to put their feelings aside and really sync up to have a good shot at taking it down. As they both run in and dodge as many attacks as they can, Alice conjures up an ice wall to stop its blasts before they merge their most powerful attacks to let off a blast that completely engulfs the spirit until it gets deleted from existence. After that, its core falls to the ground and releases Sisel, while the higher-ups back at the Empire realize that Iska is a lot more powerful than they gave him credit for. Moments later, Alice tries to thank Iska, but gets caught up in trying to control her urges until Sisel wakes up and asks what their relationship is. She completely denies knowing who he is and gives him a death stare, so he also acts like they only just met. Sisel then accepts their lies and says it's for the best before asking Iska to become her one true knight in shining armor who will protect her royal buns. Alice immediately gets upset and tells him to reject her offer, but Sisel asks why she cares and starts an argument with her until Iska hears Mismas calling out to him. Using that as an excuse, he escapes the freaky sisters and gets happy seeing that Jin and the girls are all okay. Meanwhile, Rizz is currently in Emperor Yoon's chambers telling Nameless how they are all a bunch of useless failures. He then asks where the Emperor is, and she says he is probably out trying to get some fresh air. Minutes later, Salinger makes it to the woods to get some nature time, but then he spots a tail in the shadow of a tree and gets excited to see Yoon, who then says they have a lot to talk about. Back in the Sovereignty, the Masked Lord gets back to see Kissing, and says they have to start making preparations for her election. At the same time, Nilliver calls Elatir into the throne room and asks if she was the one who leaked out information on Sisel's trip, before also asking if she is actually the real Elatir. Later that evening, Alice meets up with Iska to ask why they keep ending up in weird situations together. She then tells him to act like they don't know each other in front of anyone from the Sovereignty and gets excited as they finally have a secret life together. When he asks why she seems to be enjoying it a little too much, she tries to argue but ends up within inches of his face. Thanks to their lack of experience as stupid virgins, they both chicken out and wish each other luck before going their separate ways. Will Iska's life as a simp lead him to finally having the royal harem of his dreams, or is their little love story going to cause him to experience something a lot worse than jail? That's it for this video. Comment anti-gravity melons if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more recaps like this.